They're all named Willis today. And so if you are unsure how to change your name, it would be great if you could just hover over there on the right-hand side, click on the 3 dots and rename yourself. Very strange. A year and a half into this, you'd think that we'd have it figured out, but we do not some days. We're going to give everyone just a moment or two longer before we get started. All right, give us just another minute. We have a couple more people looking to connect and then we'll get started. Hey, welcome everyone. You are joining NASW New Jersey's presentation today. We are just letting everyone get settled into the Zoom room and we are going to get started in 1 minute. I appreciate all of your patience as we get everyone admitted to today's conversation. Again, for those of you who are just joining, everyone is named Willis for some fun reason. If you have not yet changed your name in the Zoom room, we'd love you to do so. Let us know who we're really speaking with. You can do so by clicking the 3 dots on the right-hand side of the name, change it to your actual name or whatever you'd prefer to go by today. And if you have questions, it'll make it a little bit easier to call on you instead of calling on one of the 700 Willises that's here. So give us just another moment and we'll get started. All right, everyone, welcome to today's conversation. My name is Jennifer Thompson, and I am the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey and Delaware, and we are so excited for you to be joining us today for a special Pride celebration and conversation that we are certainly looking forward to. Before we get started in today's conversation, I wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping with you. As you know, when you registered for today's conversation, you did sign an agreement for participation in the chat room. And while we all know that we're going to be respectful and uplifting of one another, we want to make sure that our chat today does stay centered on the conversation at hand. We do also ask that you don't share any personal networking or contact information in the chat room, because this is something that's public. We want to make sure that this is a safe space and really the dialogue is centered around today's conversation. This is going to be a fireside chat, and we do look forward to having conversations with all of you. There'll be a couple of times throughout today's presentation where you can raise your virtual yellow Zoom hand, and I will attempt to call on you. So hopefully you've changed your name to something other than Willis to make it a little bit easier. Or if you'd like to, you can chat the messages to me. I'm under Jennifer. We also have a couple of people from our team on today's call. You can also shoot messages to Jeff Feldman. For those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, You can ask the questions in the comment section, and we will be monitoring that as well, and we'll bring you online to ask those questions, or we'll ask them for you. Without further ado, I think we're going to go ahead and jump into it and welcome today's speaker. Today, we are so fortunate to have Jeffrey Marsh join us. Jeffrey is a viral TikTok and Instagram star and the first openly non-binary public figure to be interviewed on national television and author to be offered a book deal with any Big Five publisher. Their book, How to Be You, is an innovative piece that combines a memoir, workbook, and spiritual advice, and it topped one of my favorite magazines, Oprah's Gratitude Meter, and named an Excellent Book of the Year by TED ED. Jeffrey, I first stumbled upon you and your work in Oprah magazine, which I love, and then TikTok, and went down that rabbit hole. But I have watched all of your videos, and a particularly interesting and at some points uncomfortable interview with Dennis Michael Lynch of Unfiltered. What comes across in all of your videos and appearances, that the comments you receive online, is your generosity of spirit and the kindness of your responses. You teach, but moreover, you lead us with a grace that is truly unparalleled. So we are incredibly excited and humbled and just grateful for you to be here with us today and have the discussion. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Hello, I've changed my name to Willis. Is that okay?
Everyone's a Willis today. I think it goes with today's conversation.
We can all be Willis. Isn't there a metaphor in there? The only thing I know is that Willis is incredibly popular, and I really want Willis to handle all of my events from here on out. Because whatever method Willis used to invite people, it worked, obviously.
Indeed.
What a delightful introduction. Thank you so much. I was listening to you, and I don't know if anybody else on the Zoom regularly has their bio read to them from doing events like this, but it is a very weird thing. And every time I hear it, it's like, did I live that? Did that happen to me? You are correct. I was the first non-binary person to come on television. And it was really to come on national television. And it was really a trial by fire, as we say, because it was an interview on Newsmax. And they were not, how shall we say, not interested in spreading the good news about being non-binary. So it was a bit of a contentious interview for the first ever. And since then, I've been known, as you said, viral on TikTok and Instagram for being able to talk about who we are as non-binary people to folks who've not necessarily encountered that label or that identity before. So it's my pleasure to come and fireside chat with you today.
We're so grateful. You're right. The interview was interesting, to say the least. And for those of you watching, we will share a link that you can watch all of Jeffrey's presentations and work on TikTok. We'll share that with you so that you are fully informed and you can see what we're speaking about. Well, before we get started, or as we get started today, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your work in your book, and also your activism, teaching on social media.
Sure. One of the things I'm most, speaking of that contentious interview, one of the things I'm most known for is addressing hate online. So a lot of folks like me get hateful comments, and the most wonderful thing that TikTok ever did was they started a method to address hate that was different than all the other platforms. So if people are familiar with TikTok, you can take a comment and do a video response, meaning you can take the comment and the comment will appear on screen and you can talk about the comment. So someone will say something not nice, very pointed, very hateful toward me, and I can put the comment on screen and begin to talk past the hater, if that makes sense. So a lot of people use the feature to, call out the hater and be hateful back to the hater and stuff like that. That's not my jam. I will put the comment on screen and begin to talk about how hate works, why hate happens, why people might be triggered by someone like me. And so really, to me, that version of TikTok, or that place, that method of being able to respond to comments on TikTok has been really, really helpful to my mission in getting people to understand why, when I say something like, if I want to get meta for a second. So I'm non-binary, and I'm not a man, and I'm not a woman. And so when I go around saying things like that, people have various reactions. And we can get into that in a moment. But to pause on that subject, when I talk about who I am and talk about the hate that I receive, I can use it as an excuse to connect, which is ultimately what I'm doing on Earth. And for product placement, I brought the book. That's what the book's about. The book that Oprah liked, as you pointed out.
Absolutely. And I love that method that you use in calling out the content and teaching past it, acknowledging it, and giving people somewhere to go with it, because often the hate just lingers and we don't use it as a teachable moment. But you've really shifted that conversation and in such a beautiful way, neutralize that and create a different experience for people.
You know what you just made me think of is that it's kind of out of necessity. And I've been learning how to use my charms, my grace, my wit, my good looks, my anything at all, my talents to neutralize hate since I was a child. It really was one of the only ways that I could survive, was to take bullying and hate and that sort of thing and deflect it with something humorous, or turn it around or change it somehow. And really the work I do today is just building on all of those talents to hopefully change the world too. No big deal, but hopefully change the world.
Just a small task, just a small thing you're working on. Well, I think that's such a beautiful journey too, right? Like something that you learned as a child as a form of necessity and coping. Something that we as social workers see a lot in our field, right? And particularly in private practice, that can then be a strength and the thing that you are known for as an adult, and it can really grow in and evolve to your platform, which is an incredible testament to what you've learned.
Yeah, and another principle that I talk about and teach all the time is that the thing you were told is most wrong with you is actually your greatest asset. So to me, I was constantly told the way I look, the way I gesture, the essence of who I am, really, my LGBTQ-ness, is the thing that's most wrong with me. And now that thing has become an emblem for the process of how to accept oneself, how to love oneself. I hope it's clear in the first, few minutes that we've been talking to each other that I just, love everything about myself, including how beautifully LGBTQ I am.
I love that. Well, why don't we know if we can shift the conversation to a little bit about your identity? You're
in charge, whatever you want to do.
they only allow me to run the show. Well, you identify as trans and non-binary, and for many people, these terms are unfamiliar, and they're still grappling with them. You have a great TikTok video about this. My husband, my son, everyone I know has watched it. I share it all the time. But for those of our listeners who are not obsessively consuming the TikTok, can you talk to us a little bit about how you identify and what those terms mean?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is as a movement, so first thing to talk about, as a movement, we're starting to drop the word identify from our vocabulary. And it's just happening gradually. And I'm actually really loving the fact that it's happening, because someone like, someone who is, I'm trying to talk in the most accessible way. So someone whose birth certificate says female and is living as a woman today, what we call cisgender woman, someone who's not trans, So someone who is a woman and whose birth certificate says woman, they don't say, I identify as a woman. So the identify as language tends to only be brought out when it comes to someone like me, who's a little different than what we're used to thinking about. And so as a movement, it's just sort of happening gradually and naturally that we're saying, instead of saying, I identify as non-binary, just say, I am non-binary. Just come right out and say it. And so to answer your question, the trans part is my birth certificate it's paper and it's in a filing cabinet in Pennsylvania somewhere. And it says male on it. And I have transitioned, I've come out as non-binary. So the umbrella term trans refers to anybody who has now come out as something that's different than what they were assigned as at birth, what their birth certificate says, or what you could call the birth certificate gender. So that's someone who's come out as non-binary, or someone like Laverne Cox or Caitlyn Jenner who have come out as a woman that is different than their birth certificate. That's the trans part. Non-binary refers to anybody who does not fit into the two categories that most people assume is the whole story of gender. So we were all taught as kids, I'm assuming, that there were only two kinds, only two genders, man and woman. And I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm non-binary, binary being two. So those two categories, non-binary refers to anybody who's outside those categories. So hopefully that makes sense that I'm trans and non-binary.
Yeah, I see
And
a lot of
again,
people nodding.
we have a Q&A coming up. Sorry to talk over you. We have a Q&A coming up, and if anything doesn't make sense, I'm ultra accessible. You can ask me anything. Go ahead.
No, I think I saw a lot of heads nodding, so people are definitely understanding. But I think it's such an important.
A lot of Willises nodding.
Right. A lot of Willises. This is going to be fun. I have no idea who's who. I love this idea, though, that you've talked about trans in a way that it is different and it is more inclusive, right? Trans is more than some previous definitions or iterations of how it's been used. And I think that's a really great point, particularly for those who are working in the helping profession, to just be mindful of that and to be using it more inclusively. I think the other thing that you talked about, which was so spot on, and I hadn't thought about it, and I saw some heads nodding as well, so I'm guessing I'm not the only one, is that I don't say I identify as, I am female. So the dropping of the identify is really important. And I'm just going to throw it out to our community. Maybe there's something in that for us to think about how we engage with our clients and how we ask people and communicate with them. So great little nugget of learning in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one is preferred. So what are your pronouns?
She, her. Thank you for asking.
You're welcome. And I'm going to guess you don't prefer she, her, you are. So the movement is also getting away from saying, what are your preferred pronouns? Because my pronouns are they, them, and that's what it is. So the rule of thumb is don't use language that's different for people like me. Just use the language you're already used to.
Right. We have some email signatures that we're all going to be changing after we conclude today's conversation, where we all thought we were doing a great job saying preferred pronouns. We're just going to list now as pronouns.
But no, I have to jump in because that is such an important point. And the work that I do, I hope, fingers crossed all the time, that it is never, ever, ever, ever about making people feel bad. There are a lot of kinds of activism that can be geared toward teaching people in a way that is punitive, right? And some of my heroes are people that have an ultra inclusive way of teaching. And I wanted to insert that in there because it's not, yes, change your email signature, but please don't feel bad that it said preferred before, because this isn't about, punishment.
I appreciate that. I think there's just such a shift, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing and that our words mirror what we should be doing. So a good teachable moment there for all of us. We're definitely going to have time for questions as the conversations go. So I see a lot of them in the chat box, and I just wanted to acknowledge that I see them there, and they're going faster than I can keep up, but we'll come back to them. But there is one that I wanted to just touch upon really quickly, and they ask for clarification. Can a person be trans but not non-binary?
Yeah, trans is an ultra umbrella term, and it actually includes people like me and Laverne, people like me and Caitlin, people like me and Elliot, who recently came out. So there are people who can go from one part of the binary to another part of the binary. And that person wouldn't say that they're non-binary, but they would say they're trans, just like I do. Hope that helps to clarify. And I can clarify further if you want.
Great. No, I think that does. So one of the things that we hear a lot, and I hear this probably more than I would like to, is that they isn't grammatically correct. It's not used for one person. There's a lot of history, though, that suggests otherwise. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, Shakespeare used it for one person. Google it. No, the reason that people, well, I'll give you the clearest, easiest example. Someone left their umbrella here. I hope they come back and get it. Every single day we use they to refer to one person when we don't know who that person is. And way back in the beginning of the movement, to tell a story I don't usually tell, but we're all friends here. We're all named Willis. When I was working with Penguin Random House, I was the first non-binary person to work with any of what we call the big five publishers. So any of the major publishers. And I turned in my manuscript, and the copy editor changed my pronoun, they, to a different pronoun and said they is not grammatically correct, and sent the manuscript back to me. So we needed to have a teaching moment, as you so eloquently said a few moments ago, a teachable moment about why it was correct and why it was important for the movement and all of that stuff. When you say someone left their umbrella, you're leaving out their gender identity. And for me, it's so important that that gets left out, and that the language is the most inclusive that it could be. And in the early days of us starting to come out and starting to formulate what language we'd like to use and how we want to talk about ourselves, we thought and we wrote about, this is so easy. They, for one person, is already there. It's just sitting there in the language. All we're asking you to do is use it for someone you know. Jeffrey left their umbrella. I hope they come back and get it. I make it sound so easy, don't I?
It is so easy. Yet I think the world just has this visceral reaction, or is stuck in a mindset, and for whatever reason, there's a lot of confusion around it and opposition, it seems. I wonder, sort of along those same lines, one of the things we're starting to see a lot of, and because I'm old, I'm only on Facebook and I don't engage well with all the rest of the social media platforms. So just primarily there, I've seen it. But this idea that there's the birthing mothers, that people are really opposed to this idea of birthing people. I wonder if you would like to share some thoughts on that, because I have some strong thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours.
Well, the first thing I'll say is something you reminded me of. The first people to call for gender neutral pronouns were in the 1970s, and it was feminists. It was women who wanted to take out the discrimination when talking about people in like when two people were talking about a third person, like job applications, college applications. They wanted to have a gender neutral pronoun so that discrimination against women, so misogyny, would not be part of the discussion. And there's always been this link between women's rights and trans people's rights, non-binary people's rights. And here you are linking them again. To me, that is the most inclusive language. And I understand people thinking that, I understand on the surface, it may seem like people like me are trying to take things away from others, but really all we're trying to do is use language in a way that is the most inclusive. Now you say what you want to say about it.
Well, I think it's along those similar lines that it's not taking something away. Calling someone a birthing person doesn't take away my identity as a mother. It doesn't diminish in any way my experience as a cisgendered female mother at all. It's just there any opportunity to bring others into that experience and affirm theirs. So when we see this resistance to it, I think, why? It's doing no one any harm to use inclusive language, but it is doing harm if we don't. And might we consider that the side of the experience and stop putting ourselves first, basically?
Well, I mean, yeah, I agree. Not much to add to that, but it is, that principle is throughout, the activism that I do, that you're not, it takes so little to just be kind and to be inclusive. It may take learning a new habit, which seems almost insurmountable at first, but once you get the hang of it and you're clunky a little bit and you get into the habit of it, it really, to change your language to be more inclusive is relatively easy.
It is, although I feel like it's sometimes like a muscle you've got to use and you've got to flex and you've got to make sure that you're doing it frequently so that you are making less mistakes as you go on. And I make them all the time. I wonder if we could talk about that just for a moment. As
it's one of my favorite
people
things,
who are working to be more inclusive, if you make a misstep and you use a wrong pronoun, how do you recover? What's the best way to do it?
I'm going to assume everyone on this Zoom is a good-hearted person. I'm just going to start with that baseline. And actually, I know everyone on this Zoom is a good-hearted person.
Willis is great. We love Willis.
Everybody named Willis. When a good-hearted person approaches allyship, they don't often realize that you are going to do harm. You're going to traumatize other people. You're going to have that sort of in-between time where you're learning what you're doing and you're going to say something that is hurtful and harmful. And somebody who's in the marginalized group is going to correct you. It just is part of being an ally. And the last thing good-hearted people want to do is traumatize others or say the wrong thing or do something that might bring harm, right? But you got to go through that phase. And to me as an activist, I just realized, oh, my part can be just being as kind and as humorous and as charming and as cute as I can be in that middle phase as we all learn together to come into these places of making fewer and fewer, I don't even want to call them mistakes, but learning more and more how to refine your language that it becomes more and more inclusive. That's all.
So let's say I'm sitting with someone and I use the incorrect pronoun. Stop myself.
Right. You asked me specifically about that.
That's okay. Yeah. I just want you to tell me how do I recover as the kind-hearted, good-natured person that I am? And is it just acknowledgement?
Yeah, it's what I would encourage everybody on this Zoom, because not only are people on this Zoom, good-hearted people on this Zoom I'm getting are extra credit people, are the high achieving ally people. And so what you'd want to do is make it as clean as possible, acknowledge by saying, I'm sorry. So you're in the middle of a conversation, you call me he, but I'm a they, right? You would say, I'm sorry, restate the sentence with they in it, move on. That's it.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful because sometimes I think, particularly as social workers and as a female social worker, I often can get caught up in the over apologizing. If anybody here can relate. And what we really want to do is just acknowledge, correct, and move on. So I see a couple of heads nodding, so I'm guessing you're with me.
Yeah, and I want to say something specific about that, because if I go into an office, if I go into a grocery store, if I go into, daily life, the bus stop, whatever it is, someone like me is already on edge. A lot of, not on edge like personally, but how do I want to say this? We're already getting a lot of stares and we're already feeling singled out. And so the over apologizing can play into us feeling singled out, because now you've made our pronoun into like this big deal that everybody is looking at. And I understand the impulse to want to over apologize, because you want us to know that you really genuinely care, which actually is a good thing. And what we can end up getting from it is now who we are is a big deal. Does that make sense? And we want to just be treated like everybody else,
Right. It's calling attention to something that could just be neutralized again very easily, and an acknowledgement and moved on. So certainly can appreciate that. I see so many questions are coming through, and I just want to acknowledge again that if you're private messaging me, I see them popping up and I'm just trying to stay focused, but I'll come back to them in a couple of minutes. So those of you with your hands up and the chats,
you're doing
we'll come back to
7
it.
things at the same time.
I am, but I want to be with you intentionally. So I'm going to try to stay focused. And I want to talk a little bit about labels and categories. And we're obsessed with this as a collective group of human beings, putting people in the boxes, right? And you speak a lot about labels and in the unintended consequences of them. Can we talk about that for a little bit? What do you mean by that? And what do you see as some of the consequences?
Yeah, I suppose the first place to start is every single human being's label is important to them. We know this is true. Speaking of our misogyny conversation we had earlier, and also queerphobia, let's throw that in. It is so important that a high school coach will call a group of boys all 80s as an insult, because their label boy is important to them, right? So calling we have known forever that calling someone by the wrong label is an insult to them. We know that a label is important, identity is important, who you are is important, being respected in that way is important. And the same is true for someone like me. And I think what you were hinting at is there's a double-edged sword, that a label is not a human experience. A word is not a soul. So the totality of Jeffrey, of who I am, is not, if I may refer to myself in the third person, the totality of who I am is not non-binary. That word gives me a lot of respect, freedom, love, kindness. I feel included when people use it, right? But that's not the whole of a human life. And so when you use any label, actually, it cuts off certain things from your experience, and that's always a place to be careful about too.
Absolutely. We're just the boxes in this, and we just feel like we need to put people in their spaces to understand them. And one of the videos, and I'm going to just show how far down the TikTok hole I've gone, despite having never created one of my own, that you talk about this idea that we need to put people in boxes, into categories, so that we can understand them, and that we need to be able to understand before we can respect and honor their use of pronouns, their identity, etc. And it's just, the boxes are just more barriers.
Yeah, and so I have studied Zen for 20 years, and I lived at a monastery for a while, a Buddhist monastery. And I know that all the labels are fake if we get right down to it. Anything that we call ourselves is not our spirit. It's not our highest self. It's not our personhood. And we live in a world where we need those things. We need to call ourselves something in order to get that respect. And that's just the way that we've, this is how I want to say it. To me, non-binary is the label that feels the most like no label at all.
I love that. I love that. Oh, we've got somebody. I'm going to mute them. Someone actually asked in a chat, is non-binary then considered a third gender?
Great. I would love to address that. Yeah. No. Think of it more like this. Because for a while, for a very brief time, drop-down menus were trying to be inclusive, and they said man, woman, other. Well, who wants to be other? Not me. Going from the binary to a trinary is not exactly helpful. We're going in the right direction, but now you've just created this third, but also restricted category. And so to me, it's much more like there are 1,003 genders. Gender is like soup, or gender is a nebula, right? Gender is just so vast, and we want to give people so much space that going from one or the other to one or the other is not the most helpful. Does that make sense?
I think it does make sense. And I think it also kind of goes back to something that you talked to Dennis on Unfiltered, right? You explained your experience as a trans
You really did do your
non-binary.
research.
I love
Interviewers
learning.
will sometimes be like that guy on Newsmax, but you really, did you go to his Twitter and stuff like that? How far did you?
It's a rabbit hole. If my 8-year-old sons will tell you that I've done some watching, that'll indicate how much time I spent there. But you explained your experience, right? And that your experience is sometimes you feel more masculine, and some days it's more feminine energy. But that might, and you are trans non-binary, but that might not be the same experience as someone else who is trans non-binary. There could be many different iterations of what that looks like.
Yep. And there are some people who use the words trans, non-binary, and agender. So they would use all three. And agender is like atheist, right? The antithesis of gender. That's someone who feels like they don't have a gender at all. And I personally feel like gender fluid is a lovely word to describe me. I kind of feel like I'm carrying around like a wheelbarrow full of gender. I have enough for everybody.
I love that. A wheelbarrow full.
Yeah.
Another question sort of along those same lines is the use of sort of formal salutations, right? Miss, Mrs., Miss, Mr. Is there a good way in salutations and formal writing to address someone who is non-binary? I love this one.
There is, lots of people ask me, is there a non-binary sir or ma'am? And there is not. We might If somebody comes up with a good one, email me. The salutation, what's often called the honorific, that goes on envelopes that come to my house is MX period. So it is building on, again, that connection to feminism. It's building on MS period, Ms. Ms was designed to take away the, to me, I think of it like busybody, but wanting to know someone's marital status, wanting to know a woman's marital status from their honorific, and just saying like, that's none of your business, right? MS period. And so now there's this whole movement, my gender is none of your business. It's MX period, pronounced mix, which is also a fun little nod to being a mix of genders or a mix of identities.
I love that. And I've started to see more of our colleagues in our social work helping profession space use that. And so it is becoming more familiar, and I've seen it. So I love the clarification. So thank you for that. And hopefully that's a good tool that people can use.
Of course.
Another question that has come in from someone along the same lines is, how do you deal with someone who refuses to use correct pronouns? And or you see that somebody continues to refuse, perhaps as the observant bystander. Any suggestions for people to intervene and correct and kindly, but
that's interesting.
Repetitive abusers.
Sure. I'll answer both of those, and I want to answer them in turn because they are separate thoughts. The first answer is, if after a few times they're not in my life anymore, I just have such a clear boundary on that anybody I work with or that I'm going to be in a new kind of, chosen family with or best friends with or any of that stuff, they need to get that down as sort of a basic. And if they can't, it really speaks to how we're not going to be able to relate and stay in relationship with each other. So that's the first one. The second one is, that's a lovely thing for you to say. That's my only response. The more people can act like buffer people and sort of be like a get on board kind of energy, the less pressure it is on people like me to do the correcting, to do the, polite reframing for people and stuff like that. And the more you can make it feel like, it's the fun thing to do, it's the cool thing to do. I don't know what word goes in that sentence, but the more you can make people feel included, the better.
And you do such a great.
Interestingly enough, one more thing. The really interesting thing is, so much of the work is done without me in the room, and that's another place where good allies come in handy.
Right. Hopefully, we are being good allies and advocates and making sure that our spaces are inclusive and affirming to everyone. You do such a great job at addressing some of the negative content and comments with a positive first, and then going into, well, but here's some factual things that we should say. You do such a good job of saying that you want to respect me. However, not using my pronouns is an inherent sign of disrespect. And another video you've done.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I'm sure I don't have to tell social workers about all this, but my teacher at the monastery used to say, it's okay to try to make people nail Jell-O to a wall. Meaning, what a hater and a hateful person really wants is conflict. They want negative attention from me, and they want an argument from me. And if I start by complimenting them, it diffuses the whole reason they're acting. And of course, I can't know what's in someone's heart and mind, but the easiest way to disarm someone like that is to try to make them nail Jell-O to a wall, meaning try to get them to have conflict with nothingness. And the nothingness is, I really like the way you phrased that. Or I really understand where you're coming from. Or, just something that they're not expecting at all. And then we can relate human being to human being.
I love
Hopefully.
that. Well, it's also, I mean, this idea that, typically when we're in conflict and people are coming at us, the temperature is already pretty high, right? And if you can, again, neutralize it a little bit and bring back humanity in the conversation, you'll be more productive.
Yeah, and can I say, I don't do that for like kicks or to teach a hater a lesson or for like a sport or a game or something. I do that for our dignity. That's what I'm committed to, my dignity and theirs, to not be in a place where we're going to be in conflict like that.
Such an energy suck to be in conflict with people. There's so much other work to be done and energy to be expended elsewhere.
Yep, you said it. There are other things to talk about. Yep.
Someone else had a question regarding cultures and the role of families when addressing each other. So grandmotherly, cousin Barnabas in the South, elders are often referred to as Miss Susie, Mr. Bob. Thoughts on how we do this with pronouns and culture?
Sure. When an 80-year-old person comes out as non-binary, which does happen, I would have a conversation with them. What do you want me to call you? What feels good? How shall I refer to you? And you can call them Mix Bob, Mix Susie, or whatever, if they change their name, Mix Ash, or whatever it happens to be. So much of what I love about non-binary identity is that it does almost force a heart-to-heart conversation. It's not like I say I'm non-binary and everybody goes, oh yeah, of course, well, great, yeah. No, it almost requires someone to ask that follow-up question and to find out what my personal experience is like. So to me, it's almost a movement of creating connection with people. And that's always the answer to me.
I love that. Going back to actually one of the first things we started out today's conversation about, which I think just opens up a whole different conversation, but let's go there. Someone asked, what do we mean by gender, right? We're talking about gender identity and male, female, and what do we mean by gender?
That, did we?
We didn't start there.
Yeah. Hopefully people can, well, let me tell you, from doing this activism for such a long time, the ways that most people think of gender and the ways that they express those thoughts to me. That's probably a good place to start. So I would think everybody on this Zoom is probably pretty much over what we would call gender roles. Over meaning we know they're fake, right? Men take out the trash, women do the dishes. Men are better at math and sports, or I don't know what. Women are more emotional, right? Why is everything about misogyny? I don't know. Right, so gender roles probably we can see crumble when you look at them. What people tend to get hung up on is what they refer to, sort of a collection of things they were taught in middle school and high school that they put in this bucket called biological gender. And even something like that, now, stay with me for the next couple minutes, because this will change what you learned in high school. There are generally about 5 ways that people think about biological gender. People's chromosomes, people's hormone levels, people's to put it in a base way, people's crotches, right? So genitalia is one of them. Secondary sex characteristics, whether people have facial hair or not, what people's bodies are like that are outside of genitalia, right? And so there's this whole swirl that you're taught in high school that makes up one of the binary genders. But what might be helpful for people to know, chromosomes, right? What might be helpful for people to know is that those things are all variable in nature. There are people born with XXX chromosomes. There's a syndrome where if you test different parts of the same person, you'll get different chromosome readings from the same individual person. Hormone levels are all over the place. Intersex people exist. So people with all different kinds of bodies exist. There are women who are not trans women who have facial hair in this world, obviously, right? So even something like biological gender is not, and biologists will tell you this, is not as cut and dry as we were taught it was. And the reason I bring that up here in the conversation is hopefully it can be liberating for everyone, that we do not have to live up to an absolute ideal of what our gender is supposed to be like. And that's the invitation, that's the promise of our movement and people like me.
Thank you. I think that was a great, perfect. I definitely saw a bunch of heads nodding with this idea that we are over gender stereotype. Yeah. I know I am personally over them. And as a woman who receives a lot of email about being a woman in leadership, I can understand we're just done with the labels.
Yes. Can I tell you a story about that? Just very quickly.
Please.
My mom is a pastor in the Lutheran church, and she was in pastor school. They call it seminary. She was in pastor school when I was in high school. And I remember her coming home upset one day because they had literally told her, if you're going to be a successful pastor, you have to lower your voice. They told her, when you preach, people will not take you seriously because you sound too high. You sound like a woman. You're going to have to lower your voice and sound like a man. She was angry, crying, upset, rightfully so, because the system needed her to change who she is in order to preach something very close to her heart, right?
The system rooted in masculine energy and theory. We experience this all the time, I think, in our profession as well. I always tell the story, and it's somewhat jokingly, but I received an email that said, we understand what you say. We talk a lot about social activism. We understand your words, but I can't take you seriously because you wear red lipstick. You should look less for us to take you seriously. And I thought, well, I really enjoy my red lipstick. I wear it because it makes me feel confident.
I'm going to reapply my lip gloss while you're talking about this. You reminded me.
So, this, even within our own community, I think we still struggle with this sort of underhanded diminishing of people based on looks, based on appearances, based on how they present. And I think we as a community can do better to honor and uplift people and not fall into gender stereotypes or norms. And for all of you watching, I will continue to wear my red lipstick.
I think you should. It looks great.
I want to turn the conversation over to some people. I do see some hands raised, so I'm going to try to call on you, if that's all right with you, Jeffrey.
Of course, I'll talk to anybody. Any Willis is welcome.
Any Willis. So if I call on you and your name is Willis, I am also going to push the little button that asks you to unmute yourself. So I'm going to go ahead, and I have Kelly. Kelly, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself if you would like to join us and ask your question, but also tell us where you're joining us from. That would be lovely.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi. Sorry, I kind of had to go away from the computer because I was getting triggered by some of the comments. And I can't really remember what
some of my comments? Did I say
no, the comments in the chat. I mean, not because, again, the same way. So one of the things that I think one of the first things that came up is thinking about like tone policing, and somebody like you, there are people like you that do such a wonderful job with the graciousness and really being able to, you know, be a great educator that doesn't trigger a lot of shame and our very type A-ness.
I hope so.
And also, I think it's important for people to know that, you know, I think this goes for all marginalized folks, that if somebody can't be as gracious, that it's not okay to tone police, you know, to listen to what they're saying, rather than telling them that they should say it in a different way. So just wanting both of those to be heard, that like, you know, when we can be gracious. And then, you know, yesterday a colleague was in a trauma training and is Jewish and non-binary and uses they, them pronouns, and obviously a really vulnerable space to be in a trauma training. And somebody in their small group said, compared having to use their pronouns to being in Nazi Germany. And my friend has, you know, had to leave immediately. And, you know, so it's just like, I think that like, and I can't, you know, I won't ever know what it's like to be other marginalized identity, but as a non-binary person at 49, I know a lot of people think, like yourself, the video you did where it's like people over 30 who are non-binary, there are a lot of us, they're just, we weren't as visible in the past. You know, it's like the death by 1,000 cuts, like every single day, whether it's turning on the radio, hearing men and women, whether, you know, I think that's the part I didn't get before I realized I was non-binary, that living marginalized identities, it's not about that one thing, that one thing that the person said, you know, somebody says, what's the big deal? I just said that. But like, just remember, if you do that, you're not the only person that day even that caused that paper cut. So
oh gosh, yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is where you're going, but I, Jeffrey, say things that people don't like pretty constantly.
Yeah, right.
Even other non-binary people. And, you know, as marginalized folks, we are under such stress, strain, difficulty, and being understood is actually linked to our survival, our mental health, sure, but also, you know, whether we're going to get beat up or have violence in our lives. Having cisgender people who are not like us, understand us can feel like our very life is in danger. So yeah, if somebody, you know, and of course we're a bunch of humans, so we're not all using the same vocabulary and we're not all saying the same thing, and the same words don't apply to every single non-binary person and stuff. But when we have disagreements that are sort of intra-community, it can feel really, really vital, and like our survival is on the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
is that kind of where you were going?
No, I was thinking more with
other people,
with cis folks.
Yeah,
you know, like you know, I guess there's a little difference. I mean, I think also just recognizing, like you said earlier, that we all do harm. And it's like, that's the part that's really hard for a lot of us, especially with those of us that had a lot of privilege, and like learning how to not center ourselves in those situations. You know, I work with trans clients, I'm trans, I know I've harmed trans folks, and I don't even always have the chance for repair. And so, and then it's like, how do I not center my own need for repair, my own feelings about that. So anyway, thank you. It's so wonderful to have you here, because I can't talk, I can't be as gracious as you. So somebody.
Thank you. Yeah, some days are
I think I
than
also
others
said
when it comes to grace. Go ahead, Jeff.
I think I also echoed that as well, Kelly. I think I started today's conversation with Jeffrey, and I am not always as kind. I'm gonna welcome another person. We have Isla, and please correct me if that was incorrect. I tend to butcher names, but I'm gonna ask you to unmute yourself. If you could tell us where you're zooming in from.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hi.
I'm Ayla, my pronouns are they, them, and I don't have a question. I'm just so thrilled to speak with you, Jeffrey Marsh, and to listen. I'm such a fan, and I don't want to get too emotional and like it just to take my therapist hat off. Like every day, I listen to your videos and follow you on Instagram, and like your messages are so wonderful. And for someone navigating the coming out process, it's just like, thank you for the
Ayla,
continuous love.
oh, I love you. Thank you. Can I ask you about one part of what you said?
Yes.
I don't want to get too emotional. I'm curious about that. Why not? Blubber all over the Zoom. Let it out. Why not? Because I think I don't want to speak for you. I want to check in with you. Because I think it would be helpful for other people to know. If the tears could talk to you, what would they say? What's the emotion about?
I think it's hard as a therapist, I'm always creating space for others. I primarily work with trans and gender non-conforming folks. And in my coming out process, it's very strange to take up space, to bring about this new part of me and to talk about it, and to even like, just it's like opening up and coming out is so tender and like vulnerable. And what I've noticed is in this process, I'm also surprised at the questions back are almost using me as like a encyclopedia versus a embracing. And so I'm like navigating it, like being vulnerable, and then being like, well, what does that mean? And you say you're trans non-binary, but what does that mean? And so in my vulnerability, I'm like, oh wait, do I need to have all these answers? And so it's hard.
Ooh, wow, you're speaking my language right now. Yeah, exactly. And one of the most freeing moments was when I realized if people think, who's your friend in the frame with you? Ooh, we're getting good dog content today. Say something so it highlights your square.
Right. This is Rue.
Hi, Rue. One of my most freeing moments was if people think that I, as one person, represent all non-binary people, I can't really help that person. Do you know what I mean? Like they've got some learning to do that is probably beyond what I can do for them. So you are absolutely right that it is kind of like, sometimes it's like, here's my soul. And someone comes back like, but what does Merriam-Webster say about that? What does the DSM have to say about your soul? Let me look it up. Yeah, it can feel kind of clinical and like the opposite of a connection, right? And that's so, thank you for saying what you said today. It's always good. It's the honor of my life to do the videos that I do, and to like, don't tell anybody, but one-to-one connections like this on a Zoom, it's my favorite. I love making videos, but this is my favorite. Thank you so much. And to know that your work has impact is really important. And I feel like the luckiest person alive. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing and your willingness to just be vulnerable with us in today's call and share your experiences. That's really, outside of the broader learning that we all hope to do, if we can bring goodness to one person on a Zoom, that's why we do these. And it's so good to see it and to be part of it. I just want to—
Can I say something about that? Sorry, and I don't mean to be rude and cut you off, but there was something so important. In case anyone's on the Zoom and they don't get it, that's okay. That was the message I just got, right? It's actually fine. It's fine with me. What we're hoping for is a human connection. And even not beyond like, I don't get it, that's actually fine and okay. And just, talk to us and treat us like human beings. But beyond that, if you're like, why do I have to use they, them pronouns? And I hate these new habits and I'm just trying to go to work and do my job. And now I have to worry about, right? Even if you're in that sort of space, that's okay too. I don't mind it. And I know that we're asking you to do new stuff. And hopefully we just touched on why that's so important.
Absolutely. And I wanted to follow up with my invitation for anyone else who has a question that you'd like to ask or a comment that you'd like to share. Please raise your little Zoom hand and I will call on you. I can't see all 300 plus of you that are on my Zoom screen. I get 12. So please do that. But there are a couple of questions that have come in anonymously. So I wanted to just start to filter through some of those as well. Someone asks, is gender non-conforming an alternative of non-binary?
This is great because it kind of proves the point we've been making throughout our day-to-day. We don't know what the heck we're doing. We're a bunch of human beings. We are trying to use language to explain our experience. And I would imagine a lot of social workers know about this already, but the studies done around muted group theory, which you can Google, which you can Google if you like. Muted group theory was a bunch of studies about how a language that was created without, in this case, non-binary people, it's going to be very hard to use that language to explain what our experience is, because language was not created with us in mind at all. So absolutely, it's not a surprise to me that it doesn't make sense, that it's confusing to people, that the terms, and we're a bunch of human beings, so we're just trying to express our innermost soul using a language that doesn't accommodate us anyway, talking in poetry and metaphor and, just trying to do our grab bag of trying to communicate our humanity to other people. And all the terms don't always match or make sense and we're not unified. And yeah, so some people use gender non-conforming and that's great. And yes, you can be non-binary and gender non-conforming, or you can be only gender non-conforming and not think of yourself as non-binary. It's all good.
The language and our vocabulary is expanding. And I hope if there's another thing that we take away from today's conversation is that it is fluid, and my Zoom screen just changed, as I think a lot of yours did.
Jeff wanted to share a PowerPoint, trying to get bullet points on the screen.
But the language is continuing to evolve and continues to change and shift, and what fits for some person might not fit for another. And it's really about conversation and building those one-to-one connections. I know what Jeff was queuing us up for, and great segue, Jeff. I'm actually going to.
It's a surprise to me, whatever it is.
It is. It's a surprise to everyone. We actually have a ton of questions filtering through, and I want to make sure that we get as many as we can in. But I'm going to just need like a second or two. Actually, that's a fib, 2 minutes probably, to filter through all of those that we're getting online, so that I can queue up a couple of more for you and filter through them. So if it is all right with the group, we're going to take a 2-minute break, a purposeful pause. While we're going to
good, because I've had to pee for a long time.
Well, perfect.
I was trying to be as gracious as I could, but I'm dancing around in my chair.
We're going to take a purposeful pause or a bathroom break. And if you want to watch a couple of words from one of our generous sponsors throughout the year, Jeff will show a video from them, and we will be back in, Jeff says 3 minutes and 20 seconds, and we will continue today's conversation.
Great.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great couple of minutes to stretch. Sometimes the Zoom can feel a little long. We're going to give everyone just another second to settle back in, and we'll get started back. If you have questions, though, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand or shoot me a message. We have about 15 minutes left in today's conversation, and certainly want to make sure that all of your questions are asked if we can. So hang tight for just 1 minute. All right. And with the break, my Zoom room changed. So I could not find Jeffrey on my Zoom screen, but you're back. There you are.
I'm here. I didn't go anywhere.
You never left. Well, welcome back again.
I love your
so we have
nevertheless she persisted behind you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think I'm missing a letter back there.
I worked with Elizabeth. Oh, yes, with Senator Warren, I should say, be specific.
We have got another person. We have Patricia. Welcome, Patricia. And if you could unmute yourself, I've just given you that permission. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us where you are Zooming in from, that would be great.
Hi, Patricia.
I'm zooming in from New Jersey. And my offspring is an older, 30 some odd millennial non-binary who is in the background and listening to this and is just absolutely thrilled to be here and to hear you. And just started tea, and one of the things they've been struggling with is finding a community of older non-binary folks to connect with. As wonderful as it is to have so much for the younger folks, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot for older folks who are just realizing that this is who they are.
Yeah, number one, email me, connect with me.
They will, they're listening right now and saying.
Okay, good. JeffreyMarsh.com, just go there and email me. Come to my page because I'm 43 years old. But another person you might want to connect with is Kate Bornstein. Kate is over 70 years old and is out as a gender fluid non-binary person. Can I ask about your hair? I love it.
Oh, thank you.
It's kind of off topic, but
that's okay. Do you want to know who does it?
Yeah, no, did you do it yourself, and what's your method?
No.
Okay, great. We'll talk offline. You should email me too about your hair.
When we email you, we'll get there.
Yes. We are definitely forging a path and trying to create space for older folks who have who have come out as non-binary, and we're creating those communities online. So it's really just a matter of connecting, and there are other people like me on my page. So tell them to get in touch.
Yes, they will for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And I guess that's the beauty of this virtual world that we've been forced into, is to build bigger communities. And now we're much more adept in it. Save today's everyone being called Willis. We're able to build communities and connect with people in a way that perhaps 2 years ago, there was a lot of community building, but certainly not as expansive, and we wouldn't have today's conversation 2 years ago.
You're right.
Beauty of that. Someone else had a question. I'd just like to know some of your thoughts around cultural issues with other languages, particularly with Spanish-speaking communities, and how are those communities addressing non-binary? Where can we point to for resources and thought leaders in other communities?
Yeah, I would start, of course, with Google. Does everything start with Google? I was on a panel a couple years ago in Florence, and I was there meant to represent American non-binary activists, and the other panelists were Italian non-binary activists. And gosh, it is a whole different ballgame if objects in your language have a binary gender already. And they also run into issues like, you know, a group of 12 women and one man is referred to in the masculine, right? And just the things that are built into their language that are binary, but also geared toward the masculine, right? And they are doing the same thing we are, trying to forge a path ahead by creating new words, using words that already exist in a different way, using metaphor, using poetry. Yeah, again, and if anybody wants something direct, you can literally look for those communities online of Italian non-binary people, French non-binary people. They're becoming more and more prominent, and they'll show up for you.
That's great to hear. I think one of the things that we, as a group of social workers, struggle with is just where do we find resources, and particularly, you know, resources that have been voices that have been marginalized and hard to connect and find, or that there's a lot of fear and stigma around. How do we connect our friends and our community with those, and also for education? So Google's a great space to start. I start all days with Google. Outside of Google, are there other people that we should be looking to, other places such as TikTok, that we can use to educate ourselves and also help connect people?
Yeah, I think TikTok is a lovely resource. And you know, the danger with Google is that there are also people who are anti, people like me, who can show up in your results. And if you're somebody who's brand new to the subject, it can be hard to weed out some of those differences. So an organization that does this sort of education is GLAAD, G-L-A-A-D, 2 A's in GLAAD, GLAAD.org. They are geared toward, and they were started as a resource for media. So if a newscaster or somebody is doing a segment about trans people, or even a segment about, you know, anybody who's LGBTQ, they could come to GLAAD and find out, you know, the language to use, what to put, you know, what words to put in the teleprompter and stuff like that. But GLAAD is also just a really good general resource because they have tons of explainer pages that just, boom, lay out what's going on, where people are coming from, the terminology to use, why it's important. They just have a bunch of resources on GLAAD.org, GLAAD.org, and that's a great one to start with, to visit, to go to.
Great, thank you so much. And somebody just dropped that, Jeff did, into the chat. So you've got the link there, and also a second from someone who says they really like GLAAD's podcast. So great resource.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We have got one more question that I'm going to bring somebody on live for. I have L. Brown Diallo. If you could unmute yourself, welcome, and tell us where you're zooming in from.
Hi. Yeah. So
Hi.
my name is Latoya Brown Jallo. I have a long name. Don't throw the middle name in there too, because that's even longer. But yes, I'm zooming in from Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I really just want to thank you, Jeffrey. And I do think that I have definitely, at this point in my life, have been able to be a little more gracious when people kind of say things that are like I guess I would say ignorant. And I try not to, like, most of the time try to be, you know, a little more gracious, but I also, like someone said earlier, I agree with them too. Sometimes, you know, we might get a little angry, and sometimes it's, you know, we have to work through that. And I think it's a, you know, good balance, you know, for people. And I do admire you at the same time for your approach. So, and I did want to point out to you that I think one thing that I've struggled with as so I'm using the word identify, even though I know we talked about this earlier in your session.
Whatever you want to say, you say.
Thank you. So I do identify as a Black woman, and it's important to me because being a Black woman is how I show up in a lot of spaces and how people treat me and how my lived experience is into that, right? But I'm also, you know, a well-educated Black woman. And so one of the issues I have even with the social work profession, and I think it's hard when, you know, and I know, Jennifer, and I'm not calling you out, so to speak, but I think it's hard sometimes for me to be included sometimes in what people are saying when like social workers this, social workers that. And it's kind of like, oh, well, like, social work is problematic. Like the people are starting to realize like our history is kind of founded on this white savior complex. Like as a Black woman, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere. And it's almost like, well, you know, like people wanted to be giving me services, but you know what I'm saying? Like I would have been part of the people who were on the receiving end. So I find it problematic sometimes and yeah, social work is not perfect. So I just wanted to say that. And also that, I think it's also important for people, especially, I mean, being social workers, we have been formally educated and we have experience. So there's so many resources out there. So when I hear social workers, like people in general who have access to the interwebs and everything, I'm kind of like, well, like literally, like there's so much out there. There's so much out there. And we're taught to be resourceful. And we've had to do research papers. We've had to do, you know, all these things. And I'm just like, there's so much out there for us to educate ourselves and not have to always rely on people who are in marginalized communities to educate us. So I know that was a lot.
Oh, goodness. I mean, of course it was a lot and all of it good.
Thank you.
I must say. I'm from York County, Pennsylvania.
York
Which part
County?
of rural Pennsylvania? Yeah, York. Which part are you from?
I'm from Franklin County, Mercersburg, Chambersburg.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, I second every last thing that you said.
Thank you.
I do so much work trying to educate people, and so often, I don't know if you can relate to this, but so often I want to say, or sometimes I want to say, you know, I did a video about that 2 weeks ago. You could just go watch it, right? And yeah, we're all kind of coming to the same conclusions at the same time. And
yes.
Thanks for also talking about your experience as a Black woman, because this sort of idea that the white people are going to come in and offer the savior stuff to other people is a really detrimental thing.
Definitely. And I think that like people are becoming more and more aware of it in social work and other helping professions, but you know, it's not perfect. And I just I'm someone who's very vocal, like, I know my profession is not perfect, and that's okay, because it can't be. It's human made. So it can't be perfect, but we can do less harm and get to like, you know, harm reduction to like where we're just like totally like knocking it out of the park, but there's work to do continuously. So thank you so much. I don't want to monopolize the time.
It's human made, and it's also made by this particular society. So we know it's not going to be perfect. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. There's
from one Pennsylvanian to another.
There is so much for us to do as a profession, and just acknowledging that our profession is problematic, right? And saying it, but also, you know, hopefully committing to one another, to creating these spaces for conversations, to creating the space to learn and to grow and dismantle what needs to be dismantled and rebuild it stronger and healthier. So I completely appreciate your comment and your response to our profession even being problematic at times and contributors to the challenges that we face and also doing harm. I think we can all agree that we're there, and as a profession, hopefully we'll continue to do better. We are unfortunately right at 1:30.
Oh,
which
goodness,
is
that went by really fast.
I always feel like there's not enough time, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jeffrey, for joining us today, and your generosity, such kind education and leadership, and lovely pearls of wisdom. We're going to change our email signatures. We're going to start asking our clients what their tiers could say. I loved that.
It's
I
a
see
good,
some people
I'll let you in
nodding.
on the trick. It's just, it's a good way to ask without asking, directly about somebody's emotional life. So
I love it, as did a lot of other people. Again, we just want to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who also joined in and shared time and your personal stories and your connection with us. I hope you all took away a couple of pearls of wisdom, but a greater understanding from today's conversation. Jeffrey, again, thank you so much. We will all be following you on TikTok and Instagram and continuing to learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was the honor of my life to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.